morning, and happy Coming Out Day, and welcome. My name is Colin DeVries Jordan, and I'm Assistant Professor of Political Science here and member of the Council for the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies minor, and co-advisor to the Pride Alliance. This is our 7th annual Coming Out for Equality convocation, and I think I see a lot of faces from people who come here to celebrate it previously, which is really nice. Thank you all for showing your support. This is a day in support of our diverse campus community and National Coming Out Day. It's a day in which we celebrate people coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, genderqueer, gender fluid, gender diverse, and gender nonconforming, and that list is not necessarily comprehensive or mutually exclusive either. Additionally, it is a day in which we celebrate people coming out as supportive allies of the LGBTQ community. We have an exciting lineup of speakers today in the following order: Dean Evans, Dr. Gregory Page, Pride Alliance Executive Board member Taryn Kessel. Did I say it right? Kessel, thank you. I was wondering about that. Dr. Ron Binder. To start with, I want to talk a little bit about coming out. Today, we celebrate people being able to come out and embrace their identities, and we also celebrate people coming out as allies, both of which are different types of coming out processes. Coming out is a unique experience for everyone. Some people are out to certain people in their lives and not to others. Me, the first time I came out, I was very much rejected by a family member, and I went back in the closet for many years. So the kind of experience you have coming out can really affect the way you keep coming out, because coming out is sort of an ongoing process. Some people will come out to friends and or family in a short time frame, and others may take years to come out, and some people never come out. You know, I've met people who are in their 80s and 90s and still living very closeted lives. So there's different experiences based on different generations as well. On a personal level, coming out means being true to your identity and your values, living your life authentically, celebrating who you are, and also being acknowledged for who you are, and not needing to constantly worry about, outing yourself accidentally or being selective in what you reveal about yourself. Because once you're closeted in some ways of your life, you end up being closeted in many other ways. Coming out is also essential to create political change, as people share their personal stories, and those narratives help others understand what the effects are of detrimental policies, and also the positive impacts when policies are changed to promote LGBT rights. It is a privilege when someone shares their story with you, when they come out to you. It means they're placing trust in you. Being out about their identity makes them vulnerable to rejection and discrimination. So it's a very vulnerable position when they place their trust in someone not knowing how they might react. If someone comes out to you, the best way you can support them as an ally is to listen, to allow them to explain the support that they need, which may change over time, to be open to learning what you don't know, and to understand that they need to determine the path and the scope of their own coming out process. You can speak out against intolerance, discrimination, violence, and hurtful language as an ally. You can participate in safe zone trainings and host safe spaces for LGBT people. And you can also speak out for LGBT rights and participate in advocacy campaigns working to change policies and public opinion. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role of allies, which is really important, both in the Pride Alliance campus group as well as on our overall campus community. 2017 has been a difficult year for LGBT rights-related policymaking. As I was writing this, it was with a very heavy heart, I have to say, because it has been a really difficult year. But there are a lot of people who are fighting these changes, and there's ways that you can actively be involved in challenging some of these policy changes that have been hurtful to the LGBT community. I want to first highlight some of the policy developments that you should be aware of and which you can take action on if you care about these issues. To begin, the Trump administration removed protections for transgender students that had been instated during the Obama administration. These changes had enabled students in public schools to use facilities, including restrooms, corresponding to their gender identity. Now, some schools have maintained their policies and are not using exclusionary policies, but other schools now have reverted back to exclusionary policies. President Trump also reinstated the ban on transgender military service, which had been lifted the year before under the Obama administration. And currently, this is pending more review by the Pentagon in terms of how they may implement this. The Justice Department has released a decision that reversed a previous one by the Obama administration, saying that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act does not protect employees from discrimination based on sexual orientation. That means that a lot of people will potentially be targeted, especially if, for example, they're out because they've married. They can then be targeted for employment discrimination. They've also said that requiring businesses like bakeries in a forthcoming Supreme Court case involving a Colorado bakery, so they've said requiring businesses like bakeries to create wedding cakes for gay couples if they're religiously opposed to same-sex marriage violates the baker's constitutional rights. And along those lines, Attorney General Sessions has issued guidance to all federal agencies affirming protections for religious freedom, including in government employment, contracting, and programming. What that means is that this opens the door to discriminatory practices targeting the LGBTQ community, including in access to public services. Also, their families can be targeted. It is very telling that the LGBT rights, civil rights contact from the White House website has been removed. The Census Bureau has backtracked from a plan to add a question on sexual orientation to the 2020 census, and Pride Month was not officially recognized by the White House this year, which is very different than what we saw for the previous years. These developments are very alarming, and they run contrary to the huge amounts of progress we've seen in the last 5, actually really 10 years. In response, LGBT rights organizations such as Human Rights Campaign, Lambda Legal, GLAAD, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, the National Center for Transgender Equality, and Freedom for All Americans are using lawsuits, lobbying, protest, and all kinds of grassroots advocacy to challenge these policy changes. I mean, these are issues that you care about as allies. You may want to consider getting involved in campaigns to oppose anti-LGBTQ policy changes. So that's something I just wanted to leave with you to think about. As an out faculty member who does research on activism concerning LGBTQ rights, I have received a huge amount of support from my colleagues and students here at Pitt-Bradford. We're very excited about our new gender, sexuality, and women's studies minor that also brings a lot of curriculum dealing with these types of issues. We're very fortunate to live in a climate in which this is possible, but a lot of progress is needed both here in the United States and in other countries. The bright colors everybody is wearing today symbolize our solidarity, not just on this campus, but also with global alliances between LGBT community and straight allies. Please feel free to take a rainbow ribbon that is out there to wear and to join us in a march after this event to the Panther statue. And I thank you all for coming, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dean Evans.
Thank you, Professor DeVries Jordan, and I also would like to welcome all of you to the 7th Annual National Coming Out Day celebration at Pitt-Bradford. You know, it was in 2010 that we opened the Harriet B. Wick Chapel, the fall of 2010, and it was the fall of 2011 where we had our first National Coming Out Day ceremony. So this has been one of the oldest traditions for Wick Chapel, having started in the fall in October of 2011. And we're pleased to have you here today. I'm also personally honored to have been asked by Pride Alliance President Tyler Morris and the organizing committee to say a few words today, focusing on a bit of history of the LGBTQ+ movement, especially as it relates to the University of Pittsburgh in general and Pitt-Bradford in particular. For those of us who are old, like me, and yes, old is not a 4-letter word, all that means it's a word that describes those of us who possess the most life experience and a place where all of us are headed to. We can remember, so for us old people, and there are a few others in the room, we can remember childhoods in the 1950s and coming of age in the 1960s. The 1950s were a very odd decade. After almost 20 years of economic depression and World War, Americans settled down to marry and raise families. And the entire decade was marked by a certain level of sameness and not much diversity in terms of free and independent expressions outside of what was considered to be the norm. The lesbian and gay community were deeply closeted at that time, but things were slowly beginning to change during that decade. It was in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, by most counts, that the modern civil rights movement began when a woman by the name of Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger, defying the customs of the time. Later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would become the author of Peaceful Protest in America, making great strides to move our nation to become better at treating all people equally. Other movements owe a great debt of gratitude to Dr. King and the early civil rights leaders and volunteers, both black and white, for a movement that expanded to include members of all races, religions, ethnicities, age, and gender. But early on, it did not include LGBT individuals because history was not moving as quickly for this group as it was for these other groups. But move ahead to 1969 and to Greenwich Village, New York. The Stonewall riots were a series of spontaneous, violent demonstrations against a police raid that took place in the early morning hours of June 28th at the Stonewall Inn. They are frequently cited as the first instance in American history when people in the gay community fought back against government-sponsored systems that persecuted sexual minorities, and they have become the defining moment, the defining event that marked the start of the gay rights movement here and in many other parts of the world. But it would take years, if not decades, for people to overcome their prejudices and embrace gays and lesbians as equal brothers and sisters. To show you how bad it was for members of the LGBT community around this time, the name of the late Dr. John Fryer is one that we should all remember, for he was a significant trailblazer for the LGBT movement. He is the psychiatrist who paved the way for the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. Here's what this courageous man did. 45 years ago, that's not that long ago, in 1972, at the annual conference of the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Fryer wore a mask, a wig, and used a microphone that distorted his voice. Appearing as Dr. H. Anonymous, he stated from the podium, "I am homosexual. I am a psychiatrist." He then went on to tell the group that he had suffered discrimination and had to remain anonymous because being gay would cost him his job as an untenured professor at a major research university in Philadelphia. A year later, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its list of disorders, and the rest is history. Dr. Fryer died in 2003. But we all owe a great deal of gratitude for his courage to stand up at that time. Fast forward to today. The current president of the American Psychiatric Association is openly gay, and he and others will honor Dr. Fryer posthumously at their annual conference this year in Philadelphia. Now that's progress. As far as the University of Pittsburgh goes, early on it adopted a policy of non-discrimination, but as a reflection of what I call the relatively conservative Pittsburgh region, it did not add sexual orientation to the list of criteria in the non-discrimination policy until 1988, in the last few years of the administration of Dr. Wesley Posvar, Chancellor. But it would take many more years to put substance to this, as full domestic partner benefits were not granted until the early part of the last decade, and since the year 2000. And now as we come to understand the varieties of sexual identification and expression, as explained by Professor DeVries Jordan, Pitt's non-discrimination clause has finally caught up and reads as follows. The university prohibits and will not engage in discrimination or harassment on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, age, marital status, familial status, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, genetic information, disability, or status as a veteran. So there are many, many more categories that have been added over the years, and rightfully so. Indeed, we have come a long way, but as with all movements, and as explained by Professor DeVries Jordan, we have a long way to go. Here at Pitt-Bradford, we should be pleased to know that it was 24 years ago, in 1993-94, that the first club was formed, approved and funded by the Student Government Association, and which called itself BiGayLA, for the Bisexual, Gay, and Lesbian Alliance. Later, the name of the organization was changed to the Rainbow Alliance, and then to the LGBTS Alliance, and now to the Pride Alliance. But regardless of name, the important thing to note is that the organization has existed for well over 2 decades at this small institution in northwestern Pennsylvania, thus providing support for and a voice for the LGBT community over a long period of time. And we're very proud of that here. Although the LGBTQ+ movement has come a long way, we must continue to be vigilant, for there are those who would take away some of the rights that are enjoyed today by LGBT individuals, such as the right to marry the person one loves, the right to purchase goods in any store or bakery, regardless of the owner's biases, and the list goes on and on. Fortunately, surveys consistently show that the majority of Americans support gay rights and the right to marry, but much of this is due to the groundwork established by the early pioneers such as Dr. Fryer. But we can never take this progress for granted. So in closing, what is the culture we want to have at Pitt-Bradford? What type of college community should we be? Well, my feeling is that we need to be a community where all are accepted equally and affirmed in their humanness as equals before they are white, black, Asian, lesbian, gay, Catholic, Muslim, etc. If we affirm one another's humanity as the place to start, then the other aspects of our being is what makes us a diverse and interesting community. And we want to be a community where any person who is lesbian, gay, straight, bi, or transgender can be open about their sexuality and accepted fully for who they are. Congratulations to the Pride Alliance in sponsoring the 7th annual event at Pitt-Bradford, and I hope this remains a campus tradition for many more years to come. And thank you for asking me to be with you today. Dr. Page.
Try to make this brief, which I know some of you will understand why that's a difficulty, right? So I'm going to change gears a little bit. I appreciate the history and background that you provide us, Jim, with some of the changes that we've seen in society and even on campus. I think that's an important thing for us to recognize. This is an ongoing process and continues to be an ongoing process. And I'm speaking to you as an ally, keeping in mind that, well, as I titled my speech, if you will, not all allies are born allies. That this is also a growth process, a learning process. And I think that this is an important thing to consider as we think about acceptance and I'll say broadly diversity, whether we're talking about it from the context of sexual orientation, gender identity, or racial identity. All of these, I think, have a very strong similarity in how that process can develop. So to give you a little bit of background of where I came from to understand why I was not born an ally, or at least how I explain why I was not born an ally. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. The only difference, we don't have as many trees, we definitely don't have sun, or we only have sun, don't have mountains. Middle of nowhere, I look at Bradford and the diversity of people in Bradford, keeping in mind Bradford is not very well known for its diversity. Compared to where I grew up, this is a very diverse community. So first of all, growing up in a place where we were not exposed to a lot of diverse ideas, diverse attitudes, exposure to diversity in general, without that exposure, it's extremely difficult to know what it is that we would be advocating or allying for. Because as far as where I grew up, everybody was seen as the same. Jump forward many decades. I'll lump myself in that old group even though I'm not.
You're a young guy.
Yeah, I'm in that in between. But in that process of of not having the exposure, now having the exposure, it's opened up an opportunity to be able to experience some of the experiences that my friends have had, and being exposed to the idea of challenging my own thoughts, my own beliefs, and that this is a very important process. Well, kind of, if we will. I look at my own experiences starting out as a fear-based because that's what we were told. Be afraid of that that's different. Be afraid. Be afraid because something will happen or people will do something to you. I'm also going to couch this in the frame of, as I was growing up, this was also the highlight of let's scare everybody about everything. We weren't worried about the bomb, as other generations were. We were worried about Satan. Right? Think about Footloose. Right? Don't dance, because if you dance, the devil's going to get you. Right? Don't listen to rock and roll music, because it's all backward masking and it's all these messages about Satanism. The devil's going to get you. The boogeyman's going to get you. All of these people are out to get us. In that kind of a setting, it's very hard to see that the person that you're looking at that's different can be an ally, can be somebody who's not scary or threatening. For me, those moments came when I went to college, which is kind of nice that, coming to college, seeing very similar trends here is that I saw where I was growing up, where now I'm exposed to different ideas, different beliefs, different experiences, different identities. And as such, I had to reflect on my own ideas. How can I be hateful towards these people who actually appreciate, support, respect? People who have guided me, whether they were mentors or colleagues or roommates or friends, that these were people who were special. That's a very important point, or a very important marker, at least in my idea of identity and development of that support. Other than just, the exposure. So I'm trying to jump around my notes as opposed to just struggle or go with my notes. For me, that exposure opened my eyes, allowed me to understand the need for support, the need for respect. For me, and I've shared this story with some in the past, the most important point for me was when I was finishing up my master's program. And my roommate, who I'd lived with for a year and a half, somebody who I'd gone to college with, so I'd known this guy for 6-7 years. Somebody who I respected, somebody who I looked up to, came out to me on the phone, which was one of the more surreal phone conversations that the two of us I ever had. But at that moment, it sank into me how important it was to be an ally. My roommate was somebody who had to be very closeted because of where he was working, different mental health agencies. And we'd like to think of mental health agencies as being supportive and open. At this time, he could lose his job. So he was closeted to everybody. I was the first person he came out to. Eventually he came out to his parents, which was a very rewarding experience for him, but it took him at least a decade of that fight. Nobody supported him because nobody knew. And to me, watching him struggle and seeing how he responded to the struggle, it indicated to me how important it was to have that support, to have his back, to provide him with the support that he provided me as an academic. So for me, the takeaway from that is that when we look at all of the changes we see on campus, all the changes in general, that I think that this is a very warm and welcoming view in that things can change. People can change. Even people who may not seem supportive can change. I'll leave it at that.
Hi, my name's Sarah and I am Secretary of the Pride Alliance. First, I'd like to say thank you to Tyler and the rest of Pride Alliance because they wanted me to speak. So a little bit about me, I'm a sophomore here, I'm a nursing major, and I come from the middle of nowhere in northeastern Pennsylvania. So, completely switching gears from what Dean Evans and Dr. Page talked about, I'm going to talk about the differences between pansexuality and bisexuality. So whenever I come out to somebody as pansexual, more often than not, I have to educate that someone on what pansexuality is. There's nothing like coming out to someone and then having to proceed to explain what your sexuality means. And trust me, I came out to 59 people one night within the span of 2 hours. It was a lot of explaining to do. Many times when I have come out to someone then begins to tell me that bisexuality and pansexuality don't exist, and pansexuality is something that Tumblr, which is a popular blogging website, made up. Some have also asked me if I was attracted to cooking pans or animals, which gets super weird. Some have also accused me of being a special snowflake. Others have laughed and told me that I'm confused or that I'm just going through a phase. Many don't take me seriously because I'm so young. But contrary to popular belief, sexualities in the middle of the spectrum do exist, and it's not a bad thing. So to help with the understanding of pansexuality and bisexuality, here's some history about the two of them that will hopefully clear up any discrepancies or misconceptions that surround the two. So the 1990s saw a flourishing of bisexual identity with the emergence of national organizations, some books, the flag, etc. Queer theory also emerged during this time. In a larger social and historical concept, this period also marked the end of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. The apparent victory of capitalism, complete with its insidious institutions of globalization and finance, led to a crisis of faith in Marxist or even modernist understandings of society. This has played a large role in sexuality in providing or building movements as it helps individuals develop a sense of self, a sense of unity, and an understanding of their own oppression. Yet, I think this also explains the plethora of new sexual identities that have emerged since the 1990s. We live in a society where politics are very identity-driven and individualized. And trust me, this is not to discredit anyone's identity, it is simply to put these identities into a material and social context. While pansexuality seems to be like the new kid on the bi block, this term has been around since the early 1900s and was coined by Sigmund Freud. At the time, it was a term that described how sexuality was the basis of all human interactions. According to an analysis of Google data, the word pansexual began to appear online around 2007, so 10 years ago. The concept arose, or at least became more popular, with the emergence of genderqueer and non-binary activism. The word pansexual was invented to specifically include non-binary individuals. The word pan means all, so someone who is pansexual could be attracted to all genders. There is a slight difference between bisexuality and pansexuality, as bisexuality is often defined as more than one, and pansexuality is defined as all. Thus, pansexuality does come across as a broader and potentially gender-blind. Adopting this label is an attempt to make it clear that an individual is attracted to all genders. Some bisexuals may feel upset with this term since pansexuality may seem like it's trying to correct a failure of bisexuality to include trans and non-binary genders. Some bisexuals may feel that this term is not necessary since bisexuality is inclusive, or that the label may somehow shame or marginalize bisexuality. Everyone should have the autonomy to define themselves how they like. Pansexuality should be viewed as legitimate and important. Since bisexuality is misunderstood and pansexuality is not a well-known sexual identity, One benefit of adopting this identity is that it may require an explanation and a definition. This is a way to specifically spotlight the gender component of bisexuality and pansexuality. Unfortunately, it has added to the misconception that bisexuality is about binary gender and sexes. Both bisexuals and pansexuals can be attracted to a variety of genders and sexes, and both can be allies to each other's groups. And while bisexuals struggle with the root word bi, which default sounds like binary, pansexuals must wrestle with the root word all, which to some people implies animals, inanimate objects, children, etc. Both identities struggle with defining themselves on their own terms, but at the same time, bisexuals have various organizations to advocate for their interests and development as a community. Pansexuals do not have independent social movement organizations, or at least not national or well-known. As such, they may be dismissed as an internet identity with no presence in the real world, which obviously isn't true. Hi. Pansexuals are lumped together with bisexual organizations. Because the identity is fairly new, perhaps with time it will grow and separate from the bisexual movement. But for now, they are conjoined. I'm not certain what percentage of the bi+ community identifies as pansexual. However, in the 2014 Needs Assessment Survey of the Bisexual, Fluid, and Pansexual Community of Los Angeles, 26% of the respondents identified as pan, 61.8% identified as bisexual, and 36% identified as queer. Pansexual is the third most prominent identity in this survey, consisting of over a quarter of the respondents. Despite the lack of pansexual-specific publications and institutions, some celebrities have come out as pansexual, such as the feminist sex educator Lacey Green, rapper Angel Hayes, and Miley Cyrus. The pansexual flag was invented in 2010. The pink stripe represents the women, the blue stripe represents men, and the yellow stripe represents non-binary gender. And that is my flag. While pansexuality is similar to bisexuality, it emphasizes gender over sexuality. It remains to be seen if pansexuality will separate from bisexuality and form an autonomous movement with its own organizations. I suppose this depends on how well both groups collaborate and identify common needs and demands. So, bisexuality was first coined in 1892 by Charles Gilbert Chaddock in his translation of Krafft-Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis. It was in the late 1800s and early 1900s that psychologists sought to classify sexuality. As a result, our modern sexual concepts emerged during this time. However, these understandings were medical understandings meant to delineate health from deviance. For instance, Freud believed that humans were innately bisexual, but that normal individuals would become heterosexual unless exposed to trauma. Unfortunately, many people still seem to believe that being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or anything but a cisgender heterosexuality stems from poor parenting or some kind of trauma. Despite the relative newness of bisexual and transsexual, pansexual, there has certainly been a wide array of sexual behavior across cultures and time periods. Men in ancient Greece entered relationships with older men as youths, but they also married women. In ancient Japan, young men formed sexual relationships with older men in the context of Buddhist temples and among samurai war culture. While these cultures aren't precisely bisexual in the modern sense, and even then, the sexuality expression was limited to men, it should at least demonstrate that attraction to more than one gender has deep historical roots. Although the word has been around since the late 1800s, there are many misconceptions of what it means to be bisexual. For instance, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines bisexuality as a sexual or romantic attraction to both sexes. It also defines it as something which possesses male and female reproductive structures. This definition is confusing. It implies that there are only two sexes and does not mention gender at all. It is also confusing because it defines bisexual as synonymous with hermaphrodite. The use of this word might be appropriate in strictly scientific context, but is potentially confusing and offensive in other contexts. Finally, the definition implies that bisexuals are not attracted to trans or non-binary individuals. Because of these limitations and misunderstandings in the mainstream definitions of bisexuality, many bisexual organizations have sought to create their own definitions. So one from BiNet is a person whose enduring physical, romantic, and/or emotional attraction is to other people of various sexes and/or gender identities. Individuals may experience this attraction in differing ways and degrees over time. This definition is notably inclusive of various sexes and gender identities. Likewise, the American Institute of Bisexuality defines bisexual as a bi person has a capacity for romantic and/or sexual attraction to more than one gender. Once again, bisexuality is not limited to attraction to both men or women, but more than one gender, which could include many gender identities. The Human Rights Campaign identifies bisexuality as a person emotionally, romantically, sexually, and relationally attracted to more than one sex and or gender, though not necessarily simultaneously in the same way or to the same degree. This definition acknowledges that bisexuality does not mean an even proportion of attraction to various genders. It is clear by these definitions that bisexuals do not define themselves as simply being attracted to men or women, but simply to more than one gender. Although bisexuals have been part of the modern LGBTQ+ movement since the 1960s, it is still in many ways very new as a movement. Their pride flag was not invented until 1998. BiNet USA, which is the first nationwide organization for bisexuals, was not founded until 1990. The first Celebrate Bisexuality Day was September 23rd, 1999. The first books that specifically focused on bisexuality were written in the 1990s. Thus, bisexuality as a distinct movement and community is only a few decades old. Although it is new, there are many identities which have arisen since the 1990s. This can make some bisexuals feel threatened or may raise the question if bisexuality has become obsolete. So hopefully this helps realize that bisexuality and pansexuality are valid and they really do exist. So those of you who stand with me and identify as either of these sexualities, I hope this helps you to not be afraid to be open about your sexuality and help fight the misconceptions about them. Let's hope those against us understand that this isn't the case.
Well, good afternoon. This is the audience participation. Good afternoon. In the church. Well, thank you for attending today's Coming Out for Equality. As was mentioned, this is our 7th year of doing this. We're very proud of the fact that this is a tradition here at Pitt-Bradford, and also the fact that it brings a lot of people out to our program and hopefully creates a great environment. My name is Ron Binder, Associate Dean of Students, and I'm the co-advisor to the Pride Alliance. Also chair of the LGBT Advisory Committee. The LGBT Advisory Committee works with faculty and staff and administration to provide a welcoming environment for all of our students and faculty and staff, and even working in our community. We're very fortunate that we have some few neighbors who really help us out with that. I'm also very proud to be a very happily married man to another man, Morgan, who most of you have met on campus, and the fact that we live on campus. I'm also proud of the fact that we were married at a church here in town. I believe we're still only the first couple to be married in a church. That shows you how far we've progressed as a community here in Bradford. First of all, thank you to all of our speakers who came here today. I'm always amazed at the amount of information we learned, not only about history, about being an ally, but also about new information. And I thank our speakers for enlightening us and providing us even more information. We've had, over the years, a wide array of very impressive speakers on campus. We're very fortunate that here at Pitt-Bradford, we try to create a very welcoming environment for all students here at Pitt-Bradford. And that has been a long tradition starting since 1963 when we began. Also coming from a long tradition of Pitt. In the last few years, we've had a number of great things we've been doing on campus. Some of the things you may have noticed, this is the 8th year we've done safe zone training. You might have seen all the signs on campus, particularly for our new students on campus. When they come to campus, they know all the safe zone signs. Creates a very welcoming environment and increasingly we're seeing them on our websites for people who are choosing to come to Pitt-Bradford. Not only want to have a safe environment, but also for parents wanting their students to have a very safe environment. This year we had our our third year of having an alumni reception during Alumni and Family Weekend. We've had a pretty good turnout. And we're increasingly becoming visible to our alumni. We've had a few other things go on. We had in this building alone, we had our fall reception. And I believe, Tyler, this was, I think, our 5th or 6th year having our fall reception for Pride Alliance as a welcoming note to our incoming freshman students. We've also had a number of other things going on. We have, in the spring, we have a drag show, which is a very popular show. Usually about 300 people come to it. For those that have been here before, I'm sure you've noticed we have a lot of fun with that. My friends are always amazed when I show them pictures of the drag show, saying, seriously, there's a drag show of 300 people in Bradford, Pennsylvania. So yes, it is, and you missed out on a hell of a good time. We also have some other things that the Pride Alliance has done. They also had their movie nights where we're showing some neat movies. We also have some chats where we talk about interesting topics within the LGBT community. And the one thing we do is we value the role of our allies, and that is important to us. If we're ever to make progress with the LGBT movement, that progress relies on our allies. Those people that are willing to stand up for those people who can't. As Dr. Page mentioned very eloquently in his comments, It sometimes takes those that are outside of the community to provide more support to the community, and we very much appreciate that. Not many people know this, but every 2 years or so, there's a group called the Campus Pride Alliance that actually provides a 5-star rating program for campuses to see how LGBT friendly we are. Not only just for our students, but also for our faculty and staff, HR, academics, you name it, the whole alliance is there. We're very proud of the fact that we have it this year updated it again, and we have a 3.5 out of 5 rating, which is rather impressive when you think about it. The only schools that really have anything above that are ones that have a full-blown LGBT office on campus. They're campuses that are usually about 10 times their size. We're very proud of the fact that we're right behind Pitt-Bradford in terms of our ratings. So very happy about that. But that doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from a long list of people providing a lot of long work and making this campus a progressive campus, not only for our students, but for our faculty and staff. As a person who came here 8 years ago, not knowing if this was a welcoming campus or not, and having to have spent a year trying to figure out if this was a campus I could come out to, I will tell you this, as most people know that are inside the LGBT group, we look for signs, and the signs are almost everywhere we try to look for. Fortunately, this campus, we have a lot of signs. They're called safe zone signs, which affirms that we are an affirming institution. But that is something we always need to know. As Dr. Page pointed out, that's important for us, particularly the allies, to make sure we make those comments and make those signs that everybody knows that we are very, very welcome. Although we've had some setbacks in this, or potentially could have some setbacks on the federal level and everything, I'm very optimistic about where we're headed. I'm optimistic because, as Dean has pointed out, survey after survey shows that really since 1969, when the movement began, that the support for LGBT rights is growing in this country. I think it wasn't until actually only about 5 years ago that finally there was a majority of Americans that agreed that people have a right to marry who they're in love with, regardless of gender, regardless of orientation. I think that's important. I'm reminded of a quote that I like using from Martin Luther King. It says, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." We know that eventually we will win. We know eventually we will affirm the rights of everyone to be who they are, to be in love with who they are, and to marry who they are, and to express themselves however they are. And we think that at Pitt-Bradford we've made a pretty good dent in that. And we'd like to think we still have some work to go, but I'm very optimistic. All the progress we've made, all the progress we've come from, and the optimistic that we're headed in the future. I'm going to conclude today's program by a couple things we usually do. One, we're going to have some banners in the back, and we're going to take a walk over to the Panther statue. We're going to take a picture. I'm very proud of the fact that if you type in diversity at Pitt-Bradford, it pops up a picture from last year while standing by the Panther with their flags and everything. So it shows how affirming Pitt-Bradford is to this institution, to us, and everything. So again, I want to thank you for this. I particularly want to thank the Pride Alliance. They have been instrumental in bringing this program to our campus. They're the ones who drive this program, and they're the ones who make it happen. And we're very proud of the fact that we have a very strong Pride Alliance. Just the other day, we had a chance to talk to a state representative who works with all LGBT groups, not only on campus, but also high schools. We went through the litany of things that we did, and was very proud of the fact that we pretty much check off about everything we can do at this campus. We're very fortunate to have a very strong Pride Alliance. And particularly, I'd like to point out Tyler, who is not like the limelight. He does a very good job, and without Tyler, I'm not so sure these programs would come forward. So we're very proud of Tyler and you and all your good work in the Pride Alliance. If we could thank Tyler. Now, Tyler, he's squirming in the back. He doesn't like the limelight. So it is. So at the conclude the program, there's a table there. We have set up with some things on it. If you want to take any things off the table there, obviously wear ribbons, things like that. Most of you have things like that. If you want to keep a ribbon in your office, like I do occasionally, and hand it out to some friends, I think they appreciate that. Again, LGBT people look for signs, and that's a very visible sign that you're an ally. We appreciate that. So in the back, Tyler, I believe they're on the chairs, are they? There's little banners there, so we can grab that. If we could all assemble right outside, and then we'll